and we stop doing that entirely altogether, does that vacuum get filled up by another power?
Yeah. Yeah,
this is the problem, right?
That's the problem, is that we don't live in a world of benign nations who, like, if we're not the police, at the top of the food chain, nobody needs to be there. Someone's going to fill that gap, and you know what? Maybe I'm wrong, but I've been around a long time, and I've spent most of it overseas in unusual places. We make a lot of mistakes as a country. It's a human endeavor, but we do try to correct, and it can take time, right? It can take a lot of time. We make a lot of mistakes, of course we do. But I've seen a lot of players out there, and I'd rather have us and our allies trying to direct traffic rather than some of the hostile actors that are out there.
This is the best case scenario perspective. Worst case scenario perspective is that these policy changes that we are initiating and that we are influencing is for corporations to make more money. It's to control resources and to control areas and to make things friendlier for business. That's the worst case scenario, is this is done in a mercenary fashion.
Yeah.
But is that...
But that's what... that's what
but is that
the Chinese regime...
Right.
That's what... And I would argue...
But here's my question. Is that just what happens? Like, when you do have the ability to control other regimes, isn't it almost... Doesn't it almost logical that you're going to need a lot of money and you're going to need a lot of influence to do that? And so there's going to be a bunch of people that say, actually, we could use some of those minerals. Actually, that natural gas is very valuable.
Right.
Actually, if we could destabilize Russia's energy systems and, pump up Ukraine's and control it, that'd be pretty good. And so then we start initiating things, and we start the coup in Ukraine in 2014 and a bunch of different things. We start helping things along that would benefit us both geopolitically, but also geopolitically in the sense that, like, you're controlling the geology of the land, which is the real term, geopolitical, right?
Yeah.
That's the real term, right? Doesn't it have to do with, like, controlling regions?
Well, sure. Yeah, and I think that it's, you're talking about national self-interest.
Right.
I think in the world that we actually live in, every country is acting in its own self-interest. So,
but then it's also national self-interest that's kind of prostituted by corporations. This is what people are worried about, is that we engage in certain activity that's avoidable simply for profit.
Yes, absolutely. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think, look...
it's just what happens when you have a system like this, right? When you can influence foreign governments, and you do have enormous amounts of resources, and you do have the ability to change things and install a government that's more friendly to...
But if you're not going to do that, let me go back to I'll go to the Cold War, because that's probably our best example of what happens when you get... Because you actually had... It wasn't just a unipolar world, right? You had the Soviets and you had the U.S. Yes, there was concern over life itself. There was this concern over mutual destruction, but there was concern over influence. So the Soviets were busy in a variety of places. Let's pick Africa, right? So in the mid to late 50s, right, as Africa was moving, clearly, strongly away from colonialism, right, and independent states started, sprouting up, then there was this concern over, well, okay, the old colonial era is gone, right? The Belgians aren't going to own the Congo, as an example. The Congo is rich in resources, right? Uranium, cobalt, diamonds, obviously, but let's take uranium. The Belgians were running Congo when we were developing the bomb, and almost all that uranium came from the Congo. Right, so that's a good example of the U.S. looking and saying, "Okay, are the Belgians, good stewards of the Congo?" Well, no, right? They were enslaving people and having them work in the uranium mines, and we were taking that uranium and using it to build the bomb, the Manhattan Project. Now, all those years later, the Congo, realized its independence, Patrice Lumumba and all the rest of that history. But Now the Congo is wrapped up in conflict still. Why is it still in conflict? Because of its minerals. Cobalt now is the key, right? I mean, uranium you can get from a variety of places, Australia and elsewhere, Kazakhstan and a variety of other locations. But cobalt, they've got maybe 60%, don't quote me on that, but I think it's about that, of the world's cobalt supplies. What do you need cobalt for? Well, electric vehicles, batteries.
Yeah.
So now the Eastern Congo is still in conflict. That place is a mess. So if it's not the poorest, it's like the second or third poorest country in the world.
And isn't most of those mines, they controlled by China?
Well, a lot of them are controlled on the eastern side by militias, right? Congo's been a difficult place for everybody to try to wrap up licensing agreements, right? But, you've got 100 plus militias out there vying for control because it's money, right? And so I guess my point is it's good you brought up China because, yes, they've been busy trying to lock up a variety of locations in terms of critical minerals, and they've got a monopoly on refining those minerals essentially at this point in time. But I just think maybe what I'm surprised by, because I'm so fucking cynical, is the idea when you say it's corporate interests, it's government interests, it's self-interest of a nation, to pursue and do these things. I'll be honest with you. I look at it and go, well, yeah, of course it is. I don't know any other world, right? I don't know that we're not going to walk that dog back over, a couple thousand years. People have been doing the same fucking thing all human existence, I would argue.
Right.
So I just kind of look at it and I maybe because I'm not wired that way, I don't sit around and go, that's fucking wrong. We have to rail against this. Yeah, I'm a very simple person, so I look at it and go, yeah, that's how it works. And goddamn right, I'd rather be on the top of the heap than, not. And, as long as we're...
So this is like a pragmatic perspective.
I guess.
Based on your experience overseas and your understanding of how these things are done, is that if we don't do something, if we don't act in some way to influence these governments and control these regions and do whatever we can to make sure that our interests are being... that we are the ones that are kind of directing the way things go.
Right. I would rather be directing how things are going than not. And
right. And those are the two options.
I think those are the two options because we're not going to live as a community of nations. What are we going to do? I mean, hold hands and say, okay, everybody's going to live as a collective, right?
Right.
Which, so I know that I'm sure there's all sorts of flaws in the way that I'm thinking, but I'm a very civil person. When I was in operations, you tell me what to do, I'll do it. Right? I never sat around and got angsty about anything because I just didn't see any point in it. And so,
again, pragmatic.
Yeah, or just being a douchebag.
Well, there's a lot of people listening that probably come to that conclusion.
Yes, I think you're right.
Yeah, but this is the reality of that job, right? Mm. And this is the reality of international relations.
Yeah, I just, and look, I'll tell you something. Look, there are people over the years, I think, the CIA leadership at times, over the years, I'm talking, all the way back to World War II and, beyond, certainly during the Cold War. Alan Dulles is a good example of that, where, they legitimately would sit around and say, well, as far as I know, we're not in the business of overthrowing countries, and you think like, well, that's bullshit. Of course, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to influence countries because we want them on our side. We want to create friendly governments that, yes, will be beneficial to our national security, our economic interests, all those things. So I've always been puzzled also by people who try to minimize that in a sense, right? I mean, if you're doing something, then, God damn it, maybe own up to it. It's like John Brennan, who was a director at the agency, right? He's a relatively well-known former CIA official for a handful of reasons. He was very tight in the Obama administration. But he said one time, I forget what year it was, but anyway, he talked about the business of the CIA and says, we don't steal secrets. God damn it, of course we steal secrets. That's the point of the exercise, right? You think the FSB or the Chinese intel apparatus isn't stealing secrets? What the fuck?
And why was he saying that?
Oh, he's trying, it's a kinder, gentler nation, right? He's trying to sugarcoat, that was a laughable statement, right?
Well, why would you say something that's objectively true?
I have no idea. Well, I mean, because again,
or
if you,
objectively false, I should say.
maybe it's the world you want to live in, instead of the one that we actually do have.
Right, but when you're doing it publicly, that's not what you're doing. It's a PR exercise.
It's
right?
a PR
You're
exercise.
kind of
yeah.
pretending that we're different than what we are.
Yeah.